That was loud. I'm gonna take like have a good time. Welcome. Just got people coming in. Please remember to sign in if you're here. There's the QR code you can scan. It's pretty convenient. Otherwise, you can visit our link tree as well. And then it'll be the first link on our link tree to sign in. It really helps us out to make sure that we're keeping attendance of people coming, and then also helps us prepare for Friday's workshop, so we know to prepare enough resources for everyone.
Yeah. So welcome everyone. Today we'll be talking about AD, the detrimental necessity. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, please feel free to sign in through the QR code up top or through the link tree link. And let's get started. And so, as mentioned earlier, here are the sign-in links, as well as the third link right here, which is the quick start guide, which shout out to our lovely swinterns, Nathan Leung and Dylan Chan. So feel free to use this study guide as a way to prepare for Friday's workshop and get a better grasp of AD.
Would you guys like to talk a little bit more about the study guide that you prepared? Or?
Oh yeah. Hi guys, so we prepared a study guide pretty well. So it's going to be based off of this presentation. So there's different parts in this presentation, part 1, part 2, part 3, etc. Then we just had definitions, terms, examples, resources, videos, all that kind of stuff about each section. And then at the end, there's the practice quiz where you get some knowledge of it. And yeah, hopefully it'll help.
Thank you so much. We're really proud of our swinterns. They put in 110%, and they got everything done prior to the meeting, and we're really grateful for them.
So next we have a few announcements. So become a paid member. You can get some cool swag, such as t-shirts, stickers, and even a webcam cover, so the FBI agent in your laptop can't kind of track you, as well as enter into some paid member raffles and giveaways. And these can also lead to more prizes during CTF competitions and events. Additionally, there's other goodies such as a Swift Soul, some stickers from orbital weapons, as well as voting and e-board elections, and the ability to run for board positions and more. Feel free to use this link noted below to sign up for paid membership today.
Next, we have an announcement from Michael about Swift Labs.
Hi everyone, I'm Michael. I'm trying to put my mic. Yeah. Mike. All right. Hi everyone, I'm Michael. Not to be confused with other Michael, but I'm trying to revive Swift Labs. So what Swift Labs does is we provide training and workshops to go beyond the scope of REB, the stuff that you would traditionally find on the Friday workshops. So we've thrown around topics in the past, such as like car hacking, Wi-Fi hacking, all the stuff that you don't find in the actual competitions. So we want to provide the opportunity to bring that back. So if you are interested in learning more stuff like that, feel free to use the interest form. It is also on the link tree, and deadline is by this weekend.
Swift Labs is a really cool way to go beyond our curriculum, like our planned curriculum. So please, if you have anything you're really interested in that you want us to cover, use this opportunity to let us know. Also, these slides will be available for you on our link tree, so you can grab these forms after if you can't fill them out right now. Finally, let's introduce our guest speaker. So over the summer, I had the pleasure of interning at one of the Big Four firms, and she was my mentor during my time at the firm, and she was super cool, instantly engaged me in some really interesting topics. And specifically, we talked about Active Directory and her perspective from like when she was a red team consultant, certain things that she would leverage to help her gain access and stuff. So I thought it would be a really cool idea to bring her in to speak about Active Directory, since I've spoken about Active Directory multiple times now, and I think even if I wasn't getting bored, like you guys would probably get bored of me talking about it. So this is a pretty cool way to introduce like another perspective on Active Directory. So welcome, Katie. We're really excited to have you, and the floor is yours.
Awesome. Is audio okay?
Yes.
Cool. All right. And I will try to start video as well. I'm not sure what the right way to do this is between video, screen share, all that.
I think screen sharing, and then we can all see the video here as well.
Cool. And the screen sharing will get up there too?
Yep.
We actually do that now. Now you get to deal with the part where I try to figure out sharing in Zoom. Oh my gosh, it's that max setting. This is why I should have set it up before. For all the cool energy you gave me for getting ready here, and I'm gonna actually have to quit and rejoin to share my screen. So I'll do a intro that attempts to live up to how cool Jessica made me sound in just a second, but I will be right back.
No worries.
All right, how are things looking now?
They look good.
Good? Cool. All right. So let me give a better intro. It's weird that I can't see the room. I can only see whoever's in the front of it. So I'm presenting to one person right now, but really I have no idea how many people are looking at me. But it's nice to meet you all. I work at PwC. It's not a big secret, but I'm here just as myself today for full context. And I was chatting with Jessica about Active Directory security. It's something that I used to focus on a lot in my past role. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the reasons that it matters. So we might not get into all of the exact technical details of how to implement these attacks. Hopefully in plain English, you'll understand how they work. But I'm also just hoping to drive home the fact that there's a lot of different ways this can be exploited. I know when you're starting out looking into different technologies, it can be really hard to see the impact of them in the moment. I can remember when I started out in RIT's security club, trying to configure network adapters in VMware for what felt like weeks. And it's like, why does this matter? How does this help me? Hopefully this will give you a little bit more perspective on why Active Directory matters outside the context of it's a thing, it has identity in it, I guess. I hear it's important. There's some cool research on it, and hopefully get you a little bit of that taste of why it's such a concern to a lot of us in the field. So a little bit about my background. Right now, I am a senior manager at the place where Jessica interned. Just here as a personal talk, I tend to focus a lot on cloud and Azure security these days. But previously to this role, I did a lot of penetration testing. So networks, web apps, Active Directory, obviously, I tried to focus on a lot. Pretty popular for a lot of the consultants, so I had to try to learn a lot to stay sharp in that crew. I should mention that my current role is very focused on incident response and improvement of, how can we reduce the number of incidents that happens. I've also helped run a bug bounty program for a client before. That was pretty fun. Some people write absolute nonsense and just submit it in a form saying like, a header isn't present. I don't care why, give me money. Always a fun one. Before that, I worked for a security role at an aerospace company. So a lot of really cool things to see there in terms of impact, so what the company is working on, but also the impact of security matters a lot more, right? If you get it wrong, there's a manufacturing floor, there are rockets, there is just all kinds of stuff happening. Coincidentally, that was when I was out in the Los Angeles area. So I ended up interacting with a couple of Swift alumni out there. Haven't seen them in a little bit because I'm in Canada now. But one point I always want to hit during my personal intro is that I started out as a student in electrical engineering. I didn't actually get involved in security until the last 6 months of my 5-year degree. It took me years of studying math, physics, all this crazy stuff that I was banging my head against the wall over before I finally made it over to the security club. And you can learn a lot from people who are just, if everybody's learning a little bit about a different topic and you just check in with them every once in a while, you pick up stuff so quickly, and it's just so energetic and synergizing to be around. And I ended up realizing that the opportunities in security were just absolutely so cool, so nuts, very different than doing semiconductor QA, which is what I was lined up to do previously. And I switched over, but I just like to list that as the fact that a lot of folks in security come from odd backgrounds. I know there's definitely some good degree programs for it now, but don't feel like you have to have started out in security to end up in it. I've also got some certs in pen testing and Azure type stuff. And I have some internet profiles. So why Active Directory matters. For Microsoft, it's used by 90% of organizations or more. I'm sure those figures will change over time as we see more adoption of perhaps cloud identity, so Azure AD. But for the most part, a lot of organizations are going to use them, or they're going to use it in some area of the business, if not the whole business. And it's going to provide basically the authentication and authorization for a lot of things. So if you think about core systems like a firewall, you're going to need an account to log into that firewall. It's easier to manage people who can have access to the firewall if you have a group of them somewhere in some system, and then that access is provided through that system. A lot of the times that system will be Active Directory. So it can provide this situation where if you're able to compromise Active Directory, if I'm a consultant, if my goal is to get to a banking server, and I need to be one of 10 people who are working in a business group in some specific country with some specific level of access to get into this banking application, 9 times out of 10, that access will be gated by Active Directory in some way. So it's in my best interests as a consultant or an attacker to try to get domain admin in that domain in order to accomplish my goal. Once I have domain admin, I can do pretty much anything. I have full control over the groups, the policy, the membership, the password policy, all kinds of crazy stuff. And it'll, I've kind of escalated beyond what I need, but then I'll be able to use that to go further. So when you hear a lot of folks talking about, oh, I have DA, or oh, I'm on a DC, it's typically meaning they have domain admin or they're on a domain controller. And these are the heart and soul of Active Directory. If someone has access to it, you're basically done. Something else to mention here is that it's pretty core to authentication, even if you aren't a Windows person. This is something that I forget to mention because I've been in an enterprise for so long. In an enterprise, you get the computer that's assigned to you and you use it and you love it. I remember when I was studying security, it was kind of like you pick the computer that calls to you, you pick the operating system that calls to you. There is nothing wrong with that. But just to keep in mind, even though Active Directory is a Microsoft product, it's very Windowsy, Windows flavored. If you're in an enterprise, if you're using a Mac or if you're using a Linux system, chances are pretty good there's going to be some kind of third-party system that's relaying all of your authentication back to Active Directory anyways. So what is it? I'm going to talk about this really generally and then get into the hacking, because I think you'll have a little lab on more of the configuration later this week. But it is a software that provides AAA features, so authentication, authorization, and accounting. It'll log what's happened with users, changes to user membership, things that users have done, authentications they've had against different systems, servers, remote desktop, databases, these kinds of things. It runs on Windows Server, on premises. There's a lot more of the Azure AD stuff coming into play that'll be crazy in the future. But for the most part, if it's on premises AD, it's running on a server. To speak really generally about it, and this is not the most technical definition of it, but it's just a database of user information that includes password hashes. If that helps you to think of it as something much less, mystifying than Active Directory, then you can just think of it that way. It also has, how are these users grouped? What permissions do they have? Things like that. The view on the right that I've got is the Active Directory Explorer from the sysinternals. It is really fun to browse through Active Directory and see the structure. So the OUs are like groups, basically. I'm sure I'll get the specific terms there wrong, but you can place someone into an OU. You can apply policy to them in an OU. They'll have very specific terms that relate to the account and all these different properties you won't even see at the surface level. Really cool to explore these all. Don't recommend running it if you're on an internship. Don't recommend running that on an internal network. I recommend running it on a test network, because every time you enumerate to go out and fetch the Active Directory information, you're pulling down all the information. It's a lot of LDAP traffic and it looks very suspicious. So you might get a fun call from somebody like myself. Not a fun call, for the record, a sad call. Azure Active Directory, you're going to hear a lot more these days as well. It is not Active Directory, is something key to note about this. I know when it first came out, there was a lot of shouting about, Azure Active Directory is not Active Directory. There's a lot of feature parity. It's very similar to Active Directory. It's meant to emulate a lot of the features, but ground up, it's a totally new product. It's exclusively cloud hosted by Microsoft. It can work along with Active Directory and do a lot of the same things, but it provides features that are just totally unavailable in Active Directory. It used to be it didn't have Kerberos. Now there's some weird thing where it can do Kerberos. That's kind of weird because it's more like a on-premises protocol. But so I think the ways that Azure Active Directory is different from AD are diminishing, but it is still a different product. It's built out differently, and there's a lot of different features that are exclusive to it. So just remember to consider them as different products. Also very fun to play with this one and look around. If you do have access to Azure AD, it's much harder to detect enumeration there. So it can be a little fun to poke in there without the same signals going off. So when I first put this talk together a couple years ago for a meetup back when I was in New York, I was able to take a screenshot of all the key exploits and just slap them right on here from this GitHub project called Payloads All the Things, which is really cool, fantastic resource. And since the last time I did it, it's just grown so much that I was like, I just have to show how crazy this is. This is in about like 2 years since I last looked and refreshed this deck, and it's just, you just keep going, and there's just so many different exploits, but also vulnerabilities in AD aren't necessarily all just stuff you can patch. A lot of them are misconfigurations. So if I started up a domain in 2004 and the system administrators have changed by then, hopefully, they've either moved on or retired or something like that, but the configuration might still have a lot of legacy settings that are quite risky. Even with newer domains, it's pretty easy to give people too many permissions to do a setting that's incorrect by accident, and to have to support a lot of legacy protocols. Even if you're a new company, you might need a legacy, for example, like a database that has all the parts you need to order. Maybe that was built by somebody in 1990 and you've been dragging that technology along with you ever since. If you can't get rid of that technology, it probably needs an older authentication protocol. Thank you for sharing that link in the chat as well. So I think the easiest way to say this is AD is messy, and it's always going to be messy. You can't really escape it unless you're a very small company and you can be very draconian about your policy. So any general questions about Active Directory? I don't know if we're set up to take questions very well, but I'm happy to field any. I have no idea what that is. This green cube.
No questions for now. You can keep going.
All right, cool. And I might end up skipping over one or two of these techniques. I know we're already at like for me, it's 324. For you, it's 124. But there's a few different attack techniques I wanted to go over just to give you a sense of what's typical ways that I would look to get access as an attacker on a network. When I was previously a consultant, right? Things that we would do, the type of work that I would be involved in, we had a service called attack path mapping, where you would look for ways to reach a goal. So they would say, you know, here is a key application that's really important to us. It has a lot of personal data. Could you show ways to exploit that? And we would say, sure. And we would go and get ourselves domain admin. And then we would go and look for all the different paths and ways that we could get there with and without that access, right? It's a little easier with more visibility to see that kind of thing. But anyways, here are some ways that we would typically look to do these kinds of things. Group policy preferences is an incredibly old setting. It was patched. It's not an issue anymore, but because legacy configurations contain some of the settings that have been patched, it can still be an issue. And let me explain that a little bit better. So group policy preferences allowed management of the local password for an account through a group policy file. So when you configured a policy for a machine, you would say, you know, hey, could you have these local firewall settings? Could you have these specific software settings? And could you take this magic file that just sets your local password? And I don't really know how it works, but I assume it's safe because Microsoft said it's cool. All right. And so in the past, local passwords would sometimes be pushed out via this. It would generate a file for group policy preferences that included this string called cpassword. And you can see that it's pretty long. It looks complex. It seems pretty secure, right? Let me, I'm not going to bother dropping all these. I can put all the links in chat later, but the key for this was published publicly in the Microsoft knowledge base the entire time. Thank you, people, for grabbing the links for me. So basically, we have this little encrypted string here that we've just pushed to all of our systems. It has a static key, so it's the same for every single computer, no matter what domain you're operating with, no matter what enterprise you are. Every Microsoft client who pushed something with this configuration was using specifically this key, this 4E9906 thing. It is still published to this day. I did go and check. The link was updated from last time I saw it, but it is in an open specification for how to deploy passwords to local systems in this way. So talk about sad security, right? The password is encrypted, but it is encrypted with a string that's publicly available. Anybody can see it, anyone can decrypt it, and it is not the greatest time when any attacker can go out and decrypt your local administrator password for every computer in your domain. So that would include if you had pushed out a local password to everything like user systems, servers, domain controllers, then that could work. The way that this used to work, or that I had seen it work for some clients, is especially if you have a really big network, a really legacy network, or if you're a big company, you've acquired a lot of smaller companies, and they had this configured before it was patched in 2014. That was a little while ago at this point, but if it was misconfigured, they had pushed a file, they hadn't taken that file off of network shares. So computers will pull their group policy from a network share on the domain controller. And if they hadn't removed that file from everywhere in the entire enterprise, then that password might still be there. We could decrypt it. If that password still worked for any system that hadn't updated its local admin password, then that could get us some access. So decrypting isn't that hard. You can honestly search for the cpassword string with, if you get comfortable with any like grep or awk or searching type things, you can look for the cpassword string and files that you've discovered on a local network. And if you see it, you can try to decrypt it. And if you decrypt it and you get a password, you can try that around and see what happens. There is also a Metasploit module for it, but I really like going through this one because it's a great example of like, look, we think about all these advanced hacking tools all the time and all these projects that people have built, but really they're just little tools, right? They're like little Swiss Army knives. They're not necessarily this legendary sword that was forged to decrypt GPP passwords. It's just like a little kitchen knife that specifically decrypts one thing. And if you ever go and look at like the CryptoPals project from NCC, where you get to practice decrypting things or like writing stuff in Python, then you'll see it can be a lot easier than you think it is to just decrypt something with a static string. Impossible to go through this talk without covering Kerberoasting. So the Kerberos authentication can be a little bit frustrating to explain, or a little bit difficult to explain easily, just because there's so much happening. I want to cover it in a way that's not going to hit all of the technical terms, but it's going to help you understand it, is my hope. So when you need to authenticate to a system with Kerberos, first a user will need to reach out to the domain controller and say, hey, I would really like to log into this system. This system isn't going to talk to you directly to authenticate me, but like, could you basically give me a ticket that says I'm cool? You know, like you verified me, I'm cool for it. Like, you can trust me, I am who I say I am. And the domain controller will say like, sure, yeah, I can say it's cool. And once they've authenticated you, obviously, and pass back a ticket granting ticket, or a ticket granting, so again, technical terms are not the focus here. It's going to pass something back that will allow you, basically like a note to the bouncer that says, hey, I'm cool for this. The only trouble is that that note that says, hey, I'm cool for this, is wrapped up in the hash of the server's service, the service account for the server you're going to contact. So it's kind of like, hey, you'll know how to decrypt this. It uses your password. I had your password, so I used that to hide this information. That makes sense, right? And then you're going to, as the user, you'll take this little note to the bouncer, who in this case is a Microsoft SQL service. I don't know why, but it's encrypted with the hash of the SQL server's password. So now you actually have the SQL server's password as a hash, but we can crack hashes, right? It's not salted. We can go look that up ultimately to see if we can crack that password. And if it's not too complex, we might be able to get it. So you can basically generate a series of password hashes for accounts that have this Kerberos setting enabled, and a service principal enabled, excuse me, and then try to crack that list of hashes. So if I were to get onto a network, I would look for all the accounts that have a service principal name set. So all the service accounts, like the Microsoft SQL Server service account, that have a service principal name set. And that means that they've set up so that the domain controller can pass notes along for them with their password hash wrapped around it. And we know the information we sent to the domain controller, right? So we already know that. We can get it back pretty easily, and then look to crack this hash with Hashcat was the one that always worked for me. I've got the syntax that worked for me below, but it's in a million cheat sheets at this point. I think AD security knowledge has gotten a lot better in the past couple of years, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. But if the password for that account is not complex, it's something that's easy to crack, then there you go. The other advantage to this is that a lot of these accounts tend to be very privileged, right? A Microsoft SQL service account is going to, at minimum, have access to the Microsoft SQL server. The server's a database. The database has information. If that information is related to a people management system or a financial system or something super important, the back end to a privileged access system, I don't know, then it's going to come in quite handy. Something newer I want to talk about is certificates. So this is another case of misconfigurations where we've got another diagram here, but the certificate services on a domain can issue you a certificate that can be used to authenticate as a user. This might show up if you need the ability for users to authenticate themselves on the network without a password hash. They just want to use certificates for a specific service. And in this case, administrators are going to set up a large amount of templates that you can use to create certificates. So I'm a certificate authority in this case. I have a list of templates that say, hey, you know, I can make you a certificate for a server or for a user, for all these things. And if some of those templates are set up in the incorrect way, then we'll be able to use it to our advantage. So if I'm the certificate authority and a user reaches out to me again, so from the left side of the screen, they've generated a key pair on their side. If you've ever made SSH keys and it makes that little like beautiful picture and then gives you some SSH keys, kind of like that, but on the Windows side, makes a public and a private key, takes the public key, and it's going to generate a signing request. So maybe I want to be able to enroll, like I just want to make a certificate for something. Then I'm going to send over the public key from the Windows system, or the software will, along with what I want those fields to be. And if I need one for my user account, it might say, hey, you know, I want one for Katie's account, and here's the public key. Could you please make this for Katie's account? And if it goes over to the certificate authority and it says, oh yeah, like this template says you can specify whatever name you want, so that's fine with me. Yeah, like here you go. Here's, now you have a signed certificate for Katie. I'll verify that. I'll vouch for you. And I can then use that certificate to authenticate with a certificate to the domain controller. So this comes up a lot with printers, actually. I was chatting with one of my friends who's still been a little bit closer to the pen testing side than I have. And I was like, how does this even happen? Like, who does this? And the answer I got was printers, which is the answer for a lot of things. It's not necessarily the only answer in this case, but it is a pretty common one. Printers need some way to authenticate to the network. If you have a network that has certificate-based authentication, printer needs a certificate. Printer does not have an account, but the printer needs to be able to enroll for a certificate with any name. So this could be an example of a certificate that is a certificate template that we could then abuse. So as an example, and I love that I've got like the links dropping before I'm getting to them now. And I don't know if you forecasted I was about to mention this or not, but all the research came from SpectreOps for a lot of the misconfigurations on this. It's really cool if you go look at it. But basically, we can abuse that, right? We can say, you know, I'm not a printer. Or I can come to a certificate authority as a, you know, from my system as Katie and say, you know, I'm not Katie. Could you give me a certificate as domain admin? And if that's allowable by the template and we can use that for authentication, then it'll come back, give me a certificate that says, yeah, like you're domain admin. And then you can use that to authenticate and get domain admin or some other account that's of very high interest to you, very high privileges that you really shouldn't have had access to. It's pretty crazy. And this is another example of something where it's not a vulnerability to Microsoft, it's a misconfiguration. And it's a very common misconfiguration, especially on bigger networks where you have to support a lot of different things. But it's still a misconfiguration. There's nothing to patch. You have to go hunt it down yourself and fix it yourself. And that's nasty, right? That's really hard to fix versus just applying a new roll up of patches. There are some tools to help with this. I will also say that the payloads all the things is very helpful for this one. The last one that I want to cover for just general exploitation is passwords, because we can't not talk about this. I once had an engagement I was on, so a client engagement or a job, for a very large company that had a lot of different acquisitions all around the world. And they, obviously, if you have a really big company and you don't specialize in technology, it's going to be tough for you to manage your whole infrastructure. And in this case, they had a third-party IT provider who had accounts. Everybody had their own account, but at the same time, everybody kind of wanted to be able to log into everyone else's accounts because they're a group of users outside of the company. Maybe one of them's sick and they want to be able, you know, Bill wants to be able to use John's account. Sue wants to be able to use both of their accounts when they go on leave. And so they actually had quite a lot of shared passwords between administrative accounts that had been implemented for this domain of 40,000 users, just estimating. So while this seems really silly, it is going to work out a lot if there are defaults. If you spend time working with different companies, or if you're ever consulting for a lot of different companies, you'll notice everybody has their horror stories about like, oh my gosh, I remember the day we set up our first computers and we set the password to this. And it's something different for every company, but every company has one. And some companies have managed to eliminate it for the most part. But it can also be this ghost that haunts you, right? Is that there's this one secret and it's still going to work for a lot of accounts in the enterprise, and that needs to get prevented. It's tough to have controls that fix this. I also remember when I was an intern in engineering, right? You work at a different company every summer. And it got to the point where I would show up to a company I'd never worked for before. They'd be like, welcome interns. Here is your new account name. And your password is, I'd be like, spring in the year or summer in the year, and they'd be like, wow, how did you know that? Did someone tell you how to get set up already? No. So a lot of things will work out, and you never know what kind of access you'll get with this sort of attack. A lot of different ways to do this as well. One of the things I love in looking into this kind of research, something that, I don't know, it's a great way to learn, but it's also very satisfying to me, is I'll take notes on a lot of things and try to understand how to do them with lower tools or without tools. So as an example, we can take credentials that we think are going to work and we can spray them against SMB services, so port 445, across the enterprise with Metasploit, and it's going to be very easy for us to do that. But we can also do it with PowerShell. That's just another way to do it. Or if we don't have Metasploit available to us, if we've been given, it's not uncommon for a company to say like, yeah, welcome to the pen test. We're so glad to have you here. We really don't want you running any malicious tools on our systems. Can you just take this laptop that has PowerShell and see what you can do? And we're like, okay. And sometimes PowerShell is restricted, so you just see what you can do with the regular command prompt, right? It's just fun to think of new ways to be flexible. I think there was one engagement where I ended up in a data center with no internet access. Like, we get into this data center in the middle of nowhere and they're just like, well, you know, the pizza shop's down the road, we'll help you get your pizza there. And well, we can't really give you network access, but you know, can you start assessing our security? And it's like, no, we can't go in there with a checkboard and like do it by paper. And so they finally give us access to a computer inside the data center. But that thing was locked down and it was old, and we could only use stuff in the command prompt. We couldn't have PowerShell, we couldn't have scripts, we couldn't have tools. And so we finally, I think they finally agreed to let us have a USB with a single text file, a USB that they had vetted with a single text file on it, where we could list out all the commands we wanted to run. But like, you can't fit an executable in that they're gonna be okay with. So we ended up with so many different, you know, individual commands. The person I was working with on this was more senior than me at the time. I was still pretty new. And I remember just my mind was blown by the amount of just built-in commands he could fire off to run on this system. So anyways, great way to learn how things work under the hood, but also just really cool, right? To be a little bit more flexible with work like that, because you won't always have the tools you want, even if it's what an attacker would use, you won't always have access to it. So to talk a little bit about Bloodhound, and I'll go a little faster on this one so we get some time for talking. Is this the Bloodhound hype that I'm seeing in chat? That's pretty good. So imagine that we've gotten some access from all of these password attacks that we've been doing. We've gotten a couple of accounts. It's very rare that the first account you're going to get will have domain admin. And you hear people talk about Bloodhound a lot. I remember going through this where I was like, okay, people talk about Bloodhound. Sure, what, you push a button, it helps you just like automatically hack more accounts and now you're DA. Not necessarily. So you need to understand what users you're targeting, right? If I get access to Susan in accounting and I want to be domain admin, that's going to be a little bit of a journey. I have to understand what systems she's logged into. Can I exploit those systems? Is there a system that she was logged into and a system administrator was also logged into? Was that sysadmin logged into another thing? It's just taking all the red thread. All right, we are nearing end time. So in terms of mapping things out, Bloodhound will give you a lot of information on who has access to what systems, who has password hashes, so sessions on what systems that you might be able to dump if you can hack that system. Just as an example of this map, this is taken from the Spectre Ops folks. If I get access to a very boring account, that account has admin on a system that a domain admin has logged into, then we can dump hashes from that because we have admin on it. We get we get our bad tools on there, dump the hashes, and we've got a domain admin hash. They can be really complicated sometimes. All the Active Directory data from Bloodhound will be collected back in a Neo4j database. It's just like a backend database that it uses for this cool visualization thing. But you can also query it directly, which is really cool if you need to make a list of key accounts or key systems. We ran into this a couple times where we were looking to deliver a report on something and we needed to know how many Windows 2003 servers were in the domain, why. But we were able to query that information out of the Bloodhound database, which is pretty cool. So just a reminder, I know this was a lot really fast. I don't know how much of it stuck. just enjoy it, right? I think especially when things are really new to you, just enjoy drinking from the fire hose and catching what you can. If all the talks are way over your level, then like you're learning and that's great. Just focus on learning one thing at a time and you'll get pretty far. There's some great labs on TryHackMe for Active Directory, hacking specifically. And I really recommend that Payloads All the Things just to read through for fun sometime. My contact is below if you want to ping me at all. I know it is kind of old school to do LinkedIn at this point, but Twitter also works. That's all I have for the record. So I can stop sharing now.
Cool, thank you, Katie. Jessica, go ahead. Say anything.
I don't know if we could like, I don't know if you could see the room, but there's a bunch of people in attendance and
I can just see you. Okay, now I can see the room a little better along with my own awkward face. Oh, cool. Hello. Hello, backs of heads.
But I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming out and like, you know, being willing to share so much of your knowledge with us. It's really exciting when we get guest speakers, especially ones who go this deep into the technical topics, especially with so much passion. And I was blown away by your talk, even though I knew like what to expect because of how much we chatted over my internship. I was still really excited. I'm just so happy how it turned out. Does anyone here in person have any questions for Katie, whether it be like technical advice or professional advice, or just like, oh, how do I get a job? How do I break into the industry? Because clearly she's done a really good job for herself. Yeah. Anyone? Derek. Awesome. Here, I'm gonna toss the cube. Let's try to get the cube down. Can you hear this, Katie?
Yes. I can.
Okay, let's hear. I'm tossing this to the audience.
Thank you. How do you run Bloodhound in a red team engagement? Because I thought it's pretty loud. Doesn't it make a ton of like LDAP queries?
Yeah, so it makes a lot of LDAP queries, a lot of noise. It is very detectable in the network. One thing that can help is to make sure that you're only enumerating against a domain controller. So one of the noisiest parts of Bloodhound is it looks for active sessions. And to do that, it has to reach out to all the computers and see like who's logged into you, and see if that's even permitted, because sometimes it's not. Reaching out to the domain controller and taking all the information can still be really noisy. So you might want to do like a low and slow approach if you're trying to be stealthy. The work that I previously focused on, it was more about reaching objectives. So if they caught us, we'd be like, great, you caught us, haha, and just keep going.
That's interesting. Thank you.
Anybody else have questions? Dylan.
It's just working. Okay. On the
Yes.
topic of running Bloodhound in a red team engagement, is there a way to, so I know you can run it in memory through inline or execute assembly, but is there a way to get the output and exfiltrate it in memory? Because I know it writes to disk with a relatively predictable file name like the zip file. So is there any way to get that data without actually writing it to disk?
Yeah, I'm gonna file that one under, it's great to know that for red teaming, and I don't, because I wasn't red teaming. To be totally clear, I was pen testing. I was doing in-depth network pen testing, including Bloodhound. So I don't have a good answer for you there, though I apologize for not having that.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
It's really good to be aware of though. So that's a great question.
That was Dylan. I'll like have him reach out to you after.
Yeah,
to talk
you can just
about.
ask me after, I'll go figure it out.
He's yeah. Here.
Hi, my name is Ali. Do you have any advice for breaking into cybersecurity or breaking into the field as a woman in cyber? Like any resources?
Sure, I can't speak to resources. I will say, in my opinion, it's gotten a little bit easier to be overtly feminine in the field than it was when I joined. I appreciate that a lot. There's been a lot of good conversations the past couple of years about just having more levels of gender expression than black t-shirt. I think it can be really tough because you're basically looking to social engineer your way into a crowd, right? When I went to DEF CON the first few times, I wore a black t-shirt and dark jeans and like the same pair of boots. And everybody I knew would be like, Katie, why do you never wear like clothes that at a like you only wear black t-shirts at conference? What's with that? And I'm like, I'm just like you. And I'm drinking beer just like you. I will never touch wine. It doesn't matter as much as I thought it did. I think just let your results speak for themselves. Don't let people intimidate you too much. If anybody's giving you like crap because you're in the room, screw them. You belong here. So I know that doesn't answer your question on guides to breaking into the field as a woman. I would just say, you know, focus on results. It can feel great when you get more certifications, especially as a woman. I know when I got OSCP, I felt really strong and powerful, but I also think that I put too much emphasis on those kinds of things. I worried so much that people wouldn't take me seriously. And I'm really glad that I'm giving this talk in a white t-shirt and pink headphones, right? And everybody's asking me very serious questions about Active Directory and Bloodhound, and I'm not ashamed to say what I know and don't know. I think just don't worry about it too much. And if you do run into trouble, look for great female allies. I've had some great male allies as well in the field.
Thank you so much.
Any last questions? Anybody? Any questions? No? Going once? Twice? All right, thank you so much, Katie. I know a lot of these topics are stuff that either we've touched before or we haven't, right? Especially the women in cyber. That is a pretty big topic. I'm really glad to see Swift pick up in diversity as well. It means a lot to me personally, and I'm really glad that we have such a strong role model here speaking for us today. And I'm sure like a lot of us feel empowered for you to be here.
But I'm really glad that you had me here as well. I think it's really nice to get to share what I've learned along the way, because to me, it doesn't feel that different from when I was sitting in those seats in the auditorium. To me, it hasn't been that long in hindsight. So I'm glad that I get to share some perspective.
We really appreciate you, spending your time with us. And please keep in mind, she did join our Discord. So if there are questions, I know, don't like actively try to look for her, but like if you have questions that she's there.
I'm fine being pinged.
Questions. Oh, never mind. She's fine with being pinged. But yeah, if you have any additional questions, you could definitely reach her on our Discord. I'm very, very happy to be able to make this talk happen. And yeah, it really exceeded my expectations.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. It's a great presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're done with this meeting. So if you got to go to class, then go ahead, and thanks for